just want to say I have not interviewed you in 10 years. That was at WBBM 10 years ago. And I did see you like before the pandemic because we're
Yeah.
working at the same place. But what I want to do is, when I interviewed you like 10 years ago, we talked about your career and also you've talked a lot to a lot of people about your book, which is what is your book called again?
It's Tell Me a Story I Don't Know. I don't know if you could see it in the background, but it was a compilation of 50 of the 100 interviews I did with top sports personalities with connections to Chicago. So that included people like Mike Greenberg, who, along with me, were hired at the Score 5 days before it went on the air in January of 1992. We were hired on my birthday, of all things, on December 28th of 1991. Michael Wilbon, who is a Chicagoan, of course, has made his real claim to fame in the last 25 years on Pardon the Interruption. And Bob Costas and locals like Adam Amin. So there are
I
a
love
lot
that
of,
guy.
pardon me?
I'm a big Adam Amin fan.
He had a wonderful, story. We have a lot of things in common, believe it or not. And Jason Benetti, who probably was the only interview I did that was really much more of a conversation than it was an interview. He's just an extraordinary person. So I had a lot of fun doing the podcast. I did a lot of fun writing the book, and the book's been out there for a couple of years, and I considered it a success and basically what was the end of my professional sports journalism career.
Okay. I was gonna say also Jason Benetti because I know he's not with the Sox anymore, but I used to watch the Sox. Loved his live with Mr. Stone and oh my gosh, I'm a huge fan of Jason. And I used to be such a geek. I used to watch him in the Sox and then when sometimes he would do national and I used to just compare his delivery. He's so talented.
I think he is going to become the voice of Sunday Night Baseball on NBC. I think
Wow.
he is the leading candidate, and they need that. You need personality in this day and age. He has it. He's undeniably a very unique individual. So that would be a big step forward for baseball coverage.
What I want to do is since we already went over the basics of your career and I'll link to that in my podcast. I want to know a couple things. First of all, I want to know about your writing process because you're an excellent writer. Because I remember when we were at BBM, you did this story about the Cubs.
Hmm.
And well, can you first of all, can you talk about that?
Gosh, that was the 1969 Cubs, and with the help of Lisa Fielding, who helped produce it. I went back because it was the 50th anniversary of the 1969 season, the fabled 1969 season, the unfortunate ending to the 1969 season when the Cubs blew an 8.5 game lead and lost by, I think, 8 games to the New York Mets. And I interviewed the people that were, still around. Bill, I think let's see, I think they're all still around. Uh, Billy Williams, Fergie Jenkins, Don Kessinger, Randy Hundley, Brad Palmer, who, of course, the professor, longtime sports journalist at WBBM Newsradio, and then with Channel 7, who covered that team. And we did a lot of sound. And I think kind of that may have just been subconsciously a prelude to Tell Me a Story I Don't Know, which also involved a lot of sound, historic sound. And I think it was a 13-minute piece that I really loved doing, and it was fun. And gosh, it's yeah, that's 1969, so that would have been what 7 years ago or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and first of all, it's very well written, very well produced. Lisa's a total pro. And with your podcast, I know that you did 100 interviews and you're not currently doing it, but people can still access it. Where can they access it?
On Apple Podcasts, probably somewhere on Spotify. I mean, it had um, different outlets, but if you look up "Tell Me a Story I Don't Know," you will find it. It's there. It's obviously, but it's the guy who helped really put it on the map, TJ Reeves, who was I say was in a positive way the pre and post game host for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their announcer just retired, and I think TJ is in line to become the announcer there. That would be great. Um, but you can find, I'm sure you can find it on, but certainly on Apple Podcasts. Just put
And
in "Tell me a story I don't know" and you'll find it.
yeah, and isn't it part of a network?
It was part of a network. First, it was individual, it was part of one network, it was part of another network. But that doesn't matter because it'll take you, I think, to the podcast itself. I haven't done that in a long time. I wouldn't know, but I suspect that that's exactly what it would be.
Okay. And also, I just want to talk to you also about just your writing because I did read some of the what you wrote in your book, and your writing is so incredible. So, how did you learn how to write like that? What's your process? Not just
Well,
for that, but
for,
also your sports writing over the
yeah.
years.
Well, first of all, I started writing backwards, which was really good. And then I said, you know what? If you start writing forward, it might be a little better. I don't know. I just started in college. Um, I had some pretty good English teachers in grammar school. Honestly, that was really important. I remember particularly fourth grade. Her name was Mrs. Anderson. I forget. We all know the names of teachers. She had an impact because she was very much into figures of speech, and I learned how to use metaphors and similes and things like that. But I wasn't really writing until I got on the radio, and it just was. I had a different bend to the way I wrote. Sometimes people said you were throwing opinions in there. They weren't wrong. And when I started at the score, it allowed me to be that creative in doing so. Print is different, albeit, um, I'm using quotes in the book, but it's not just quotes. It's writing around the quotes. It's writing the story of the story. But other than that, I mean, I think the news radio format for me was perfect. It was, you got to make stories short. You have to use sound, but I always felt the need to be, well, I think it's natural for me to be creative. And I loved doing it. Whether I was subbing for the great late Red Motlow, where I had a lot of fun there because that I was a freewheeler doing that, to MAQ All News, run by Scott Herman, then the Score, then WGN, and then WBBM. I wasn't going to change my style, and really nobody said you had to. So it's just I wanted to make sure that I'm informing people, but I wanted to do it in a manner that was fun and enjoyable to listen to. That format worked for me perfectly.
So you established that early on.
I'm sorry.
You established that early on.
Oh, I established that in college.
Okay.
When I started working in 1974, when I stepped into a newsroom at Southern Illinois University. So I was working at one of their small college stations, but the main station, WSIU Radio and Television, I walked into the newsroom and I was like, this is where I need to be. And it's the way I started to write. And within 6 months, I was named the sports director of the radio and television department, which was supposed to be a 2 quarter. The school is on quarter system, so you're only supposed to be the sports director for 2 quarters, and they let me do it for six. And I don't know, whatever happened, it worked, and I kept honing it, and yet I didn't have a full-time radio job in Chicago until the score. So I was a freelance and I was writing for National Public Radio. So back then, NPR used freelance people to do sports as well. And so I would do stories, whether they were Chicago stories or national stories related to where I could interview somebody here, and make a story out of that. And I aired, I think, 150 of those on NPR for 20 years. I worked for the BBC. I worked for the CBC. I did a lot of writing for them. So I was honing that kind of writing, um, albeit it was a little more straightforward with NPR than it was when I started working at the Score and eventually at WBBM. But it was a great training ground. I mean, seriously, my writing was honed by really solid, intelligent editors at NPR. Most noteworthy, Tommy Goldman, who just retired, I think it was last year, and he became their national sports correspondent, which was just great. That's something I would have loved to have been as a guy who's traveling, around the world doing that kind of stuff. But um, that was a great training ground for me as I progressed in the industry.
Well, I was asking, about NPR. Did you have more time to tell your story? Because I know
Oh
BBM
yes.
doesn't.
Oh yeah. No, those stories were usually 3.5 minutes.
Okay.
Sometimes they gave me a 5 minute story, but usually they were 3.5 minutes. And in 3.5 minutes, you're weaving in sound, but you have a little more latitude now to basically to tell a story. Look, you could tell a story in 30 seconds too. That's what BBM was. That's what's anchoring a sportscast was. You had 2 minutes to do it. Here you had 3.5 minutes on one subject. This is a sportscast, so you have little bits here and there. But if you're doing a story like that, you get that much time. So yeah, you were able to expound on CBC. Sometimes they gave me 5, 6 minutes, which gave you more latitude. I really enjoyed doing that stuff. That was so much fun to do that, and particularly when I was a freelance, I had the time and effort to do those things, and the deadline was such that you made your own deadline. Even though I may have had a deadline that was 2 days later, I wanted to make sure it was done quickly. And remember, when we started doing that, 1980, I started working for them in 1980, there was no internet. So you had to, call the editor, use the phone. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a phone. You unscrewed the receiver. You had what was called alligator clips that went into the phone and into your recorder. And so you were able to talk to the editor and play your story along with the sound. And that's how they edit it until we made the progression not just uh, to the internet, but how you edited, how you could just send stories in, and then they would send them back to you. That was the old days, and that was the way it worked. And hey, it was. Let me tell you something. It was great fun doing it.
Yeah, and I want to say also, I remember at BBM, you would also record things through the system, but it wasn't as difficult. It was actually really fun. It was digital.
Yep, it's digital. Digital is different.
Yeah.
Hey, it's progress, right?
Yeah. And when you were doing stuff for the CBC and the BBC, did you have to change your spelling?
No, no, no. Remember, this was all radio. There was nothing. There was nothing in print for
Okay.
any of them. All of this was radio. So there was nothing involving spelling whatsoever.
Yeah, because I guess, because some people are sticklers, and even though they're not printing it, they're sometimes people are sticklers about the way things are spelled, even if they're just getting a script. But I was wondering if they ever pointed that out.
No, no,
Okay.
I didn't do a whole lot for the BBC, and the CBC was the same process. I was there with them the same period of time from 1980 to 1998. Whether it was minute stories, which you could do for them, to long form stories, which they would do on the weekend. No, it worked the same way. You would basically call it in, live with them, and hey, here's the editor, and this is what we're doing, and they would do a few, edits here and there. Can you write this? Can you write that? But no, there was the print had nothing to do with it. Anyhow, I always needed spell check. I'm a terrible speller.
Right.
I'm a brutal speller.
Well, also, when you were working freelance for several years and then you just became a regular staff, did you like being a regular staff better? Or what was the difference?
The time came. I freelanced for 13 years. And so part of wanting to finally get on the air was to bug Red Motlow in 1987. And finally, I think in 1988, on vacation relief, that's where I was. And I needed that as my own resume. That got me into the door at MAQ All News, where I got a pretty decent amount of work. And that obviously got me into the door at the score. In the interim, I was offered a job to to be a talk show host in Toronto.
Hmm.
And this was with Bob McCowan, who's now retired, but he was the biggest name in Canadian radio for 40 plus years. And the general manager, who I believe is still a general manager in Buffalo today, Alan Davis, he wanted me to try out because one of the his sidekicks was leaving, and so they brought me up. This was in November during Grey Cup week. Now, for people who don't know, the Grey Cup is the equivalent to the NFL's Super Bowl, and that's in the CFL, the Canadian Football League. The only thing I knew about a Grey Cup is I used to wear one when I was playing sports. I had no idea. And, I had to really BS my way through that. But they already knew who I was. I was on the radio station for like 18 years, and they offered me a job. And so, I brought my then fiance, who has been my wife now for 32 plus years, and we started looking at property. I was taking this very seriously. And I said to myself, um, I really, really would rather stay in the States. I love Toronto. Toronto's a fabulous city. And I took a gamble, and the gamble paid off when the score came calling, and that's all she wrote from there.
Was that CFRB by any chance?
No, no, it was CJCL, which is now called the Fan 590.
Okay. What's it like to get the call internationally and then, be asked to be on this history making station?
I mean, I was surprised that they called me to do that since I wasn't a Canadian.
Mhm.
And all the people that were working there and were sidekicks to Bob were Canadian. But I had established a reputation with them and with Bob. And so they just said, look, this was Alan Davis. He brought me up there. And look, they offered me a very generous, contract.
Wow.
But honestly, you know, you don't know how long you're going to last. It could sidetrack your career. The bottom line is every step I took in my professional career turned out to be the right step. Even the one that involved Webio actually may not have been the right step, but it led me to other right steps. I, I followed a certain path. Sometimes the path um, came out of nowhere, freelancing, that came out of nowhere, to paths I created. So, look, Canada was one, Dallas was another, to do college football and to do morning drive. I turned them down because I'm just not a football guy. And I told my very close friend, Dave Woloshin, who has been the voice of Memphis sports now for 40 years. We went to high school together. And I said, look, let me point you in the direction of this guy. And Dave got the job and lasted 9 months because he hated it. But it was like it was a joy to tell a friend, hey, look, let me recommend you instead. But pretty much the paths that I took, I wouldn't have changed a single thing that I did in the 50 years that I was doing this, not one.
Because I know Webio's infamous and I know it didn't last a long
No,
time.
no.
So how did you, I don't know if you want to talk about that. If you don't, it's okay. But how did you deal with that and then make it into a win for you?
Well, first of all, the score was already making moves to eliminate sports anchors. So we're talking about so when now is this? It's
2008, 2009.
that's right. Yeah, 2009. Thanks for reminding me. Um, the Fred Hubner was already let go. I was going to be the next one. So the choice was simple. Let's see how this works, with Mike North and the group. They had no idea that this infamous fellow named David Hernandez was running a Ponzi scheme, and it lasted nine weeks. In the meantime, I was traveling. I traveled with the Blackhawks. I traveled to Calgary, Vancouver, Detroit. I covered a Bulls playoff game in Boston. It was a lot of fun until it wasn't a lot of fun. what happened after that was unfortunate in that, so this is June of 2009. And so it's gone. Okay. It's over. What do we do now? I called Dave Ennett, the great Dave Ennett, because that's who he is, the great Dave Ennett, who's still the voice of Northwestern sports and WGN. And I said, "Do you have any work for me?" And he said no. And he called me back a week later and said, we might have a little part-time work for you. When can you come in? And I said, Dave, I've got a little problem with my voice. I don't know if it's laryngitis, give me a few days. I had it checked out. It wasn't laryngitis. It was a paralyzed vocal cord. I basically couldn't talk. I could whisper for the next like 4 months. And I went to what's called the Bastion Voice Institute, located in Lombard, that treated all sorts of voice people, opera singers, others. And I was there, gosh, they gave me so many different methods by which to get my voice back, and it didn't work. And they said, okay, we have one last opportunity. We're going to shoot a gel in your neck and you'll get your voice back. And I did. It was only 80%, but I got it back. I called Dave Ed. He still had the job open for me in November.
What a
A
great
week,
guy.
a week later, I went to work. And it wasn't the same voice. That took about a year and a half to come back 100%. But I worked there, um, and I would fill in. That was great. It was part-time work. And so it is now June. The Blackhawks are in the stand. I was still, by the way, doing some freelance work, and mostly for the CBC. Now comes the Stanley Cup Finals against Philadelphia. So I'm covering games for the CBC, but not for GN. They had one of the reporters is covering the game, but it comes to game six. Game six was in Philadelphia. And I believe Dan Zampillo, who used to work at the Score, was their uh, I don't know, I forgot his
Assistant
title.
program director.
Yeah. He said, "Hey, would you like to cover game six in Philadelphia?" I said, "Give me a minute." Yes. What, crazy? Are you nuts? What? And so there I went. And I was part of the broadcast team. And, when the game is over and the Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup, I'm on the bench 30 seconds later. And I am watching from close up as the Blackhawks are skating around with a Stanley Cup. Now, you're in the moment, you're working. You don't have time to admire, though it was quite something. And then you're on the ice and you're trying to interview people. We had some technical difficulties, which really sucked. But what a tremendous highlight and luck to have been in that position. And 2 months later, um, BBM became available. Mark Grody, who is still at the Score to this day, was working both sides of the street. It's an interesting story. I don't think I ever mentioned this. And so Mark, when we got together, was weighing, should I stay at BBM, or they're offering me a full-time job at the Score. And I said, you would be nuts not to take the job at the Score because it's upwardly mobile. BBM is BBM. This is where you are. This is what you're going to do. Nothing's going to change. Now, selfishly, I'm thinking, please take the job at the Score so that I could take the job at BBM. I was a candidate for the job. And he did that, and I got hired at BBM. And to this day, because at that stage I was 55 or 56. This is going to be my last job, right? BBM does not hire people my age to do that. The people that were there whether they were originals or they were just coming in there, they'd been there for 40 years plus or whatever. They usually hired younger people, but I had a track record, and so they hired me. In the meantime, Grody is still flourishing at the Score, and I'm very, very happy that he's doing that. And, but there I was at BBM for the 10 years, which included when we had COVID. we started working from home. I was anchoring sports from home, and it was a very unique thing to do. Um, and I flourished. We had to come up with stories. We had to really be creative. The staff had to be very creative in putting together these sportscasts. And I enjoyed that until July 14th of 2020 when I was dismissed, let go coldly. Um, and that was the beginning of the cost cutting at BBM because I wasn't the first one. They never replaced Jeff Joniak. So they made the anchors do the sports. Dave Kerner retired. So suddenly the staff went from 5.5 people to basically two plus now. Josh Liss, I think, Rick Gregg, who's absolutely wonderful.
Awesome.
Now there's a creative writer for you.
Great writer.
And I forgot what's Justin's name. He's very good.
Mhm.
The guy who does news and sports. He's very talented.
Yeah, very good.
But that ended that. And so I'm sitting at home and I gotta, what am I gonna do now? I'm 66. I'm not done. I'm far from done. I had to learn about podcasts. I didn't listen to many podcasts, but I said, let me examine because I have an idea. Here's the idea that wound up being tell me a story I don't know. I talked to 2 dozen people who were involved in sportscasts, both locally and nationally. How is the best way to put this thing together? Who do I get in contact with to get the ball rolling? See, the idea was there. This is where TJ Reeves comes in because TJ is a close friend of my high school friend, Dave Voloshin. And he called me and he said, any friend of Dave is a friend of mine. I will do whatever I can to help you with this. And he did. And I started doing pre-interviews before we got going. I canned maybe 6 or 7 interviews, including Marv Albert and Michael Wilben and one such. And off I went, and I had it monetized. I got people to be sponsors of it.
Wow.
And so I kept things going. I kept my career going that way for 3 more years. And then I wrote the book. I went on a book tour. I loved doing that. They had their own publicist. Well, guess what? He wasn't very good. I know everybody in the business to do television or radio and all that stuff. I did it. It was great. And it was over. It was over. And that was January of 2024. And I had to figure out what to do. And that's where the next story will come from.
Well, yeah. Well, my question, I'm just typing this out now so I don't forget. How did you get sponsors? It's extremely hard to get sponsors for a podcast.
They were people I knew in the industry and people I did not know that connected me to them. Vienna Beef, they were a sponsor for 2 years, just great. Um, Keith Thompson, who owns two big businesses, was an absolute accident, and he was a sponsor and remains a friend. The Paulina Market was a sponsor. I forget. A friend of mine who had a jewelry store, he was a sponsor. So you tapped into people you knew, so that you could make a buck. I didn't want to do that for free. I wanted to at least make some kind of money off of it. And I did. And halfway through it, I convinced Triumph Books to let me write a book of 50 of the podcasts that I did. And they paid me as well, which was good. And so I kind of just it's the funny thing is, like I say, you find a path. Sometimes the path is there for you, and sometimes you have to create the path. I had to really create the path this time, and it worked. And I loved doing it until it finally became a task to chase people. I probably could have had 14 or 15 more interviews, but I was getting tired of chasing people. Hey, would you want to do this? And some people would respond no, and most people wouldn't respond. And I just said, okay, we're done after 3 years. It
But also
worked.
you hit 100, so that's good.
Yeah, but it wasn't a number that I was
Yeah.
chasing. It was just I would rather have gotten even further than that. I examined the possibility of doing this nationally. Believe me, I worked hard on that, but I couldn't get the connections to continue doing it that way because I enjoyed interviewing people. I thought I was pretty good at that. But it ended, and you had to find another path. I'm now on another path.
Yeah, because I was asking about your other path, but what's interesting is you said you were 66 because that's usually when people start collecting Social Security and they start winding down
I
and
did collect,
retiring.
so I started collecting it when I was 67. Winding down, what was I going to do winding down? This is not in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s where people said you're done at 65. What are you going to do? What am I going to play golf? I don't play golf. Can I play tennis? Yeah, but after that, what do you want to do? I still wanted to work. I tried to stay in the industry. I had a few a few irons in the fire, though the fire wasn't flickering enough. So that finally ended. And when it ended, I had to take the next path. Did I want to stay in radio? Yes. If there was no COVID, I don't know what would have happened with BBM. I think they were cost cutting anyhow. My goal was to stay with them until now or even past now. It wasn't rocket science for me. I didn't like covering games. I hated covering games at that stage. So because covering games became very, very boring for me. But being behind the microphone and writing, that was a pleasure. That was a joy for me to do. I mean, you were in there. You saw, I was kind of frenetic at times in getting stuff done so that we can get it on the air. And as you also recall, Margaret, I'm a very good yawner.
Well,
Remember
yeah. Yeah, I remember some people
that?
came in and they watched you do the sports live. My husband and and they were like, my husband even said he's older. He said, "Oh my gosh, he is so incredible." And I said, "Yeah, that's what a pro is." I mean, for me, watching people like you and some other pros, it's very inspiring. And plus,
Yeah.
we love radio. And let me ask you, why do you love radio?
Because I have a great face for radio. I tried for television. I mean, I did television in college for 4 years. I sent out some resumes. I sent out a resume to ESPN. This is before ESPN was on the air. They were on the air in 1979. I left college in 1977, and that obviously that didn't work. I think I got offered a job in North Dakota. That's one I turned down. But who knows? I could have kept going and maybe done television because I like doing television. But after a while, I just became, a television guest. Radio was fine. I thrived in radio.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. One is why didn't you like doing games? And then a second question is how come you feel like you've thrived in radio?
I got tired of doing games. I covered over 3,500 sporting events, and you know, you go to a, a baseball game, you're there for 9 hours. And they got tedious. The teams weren't that good. Some of them weren't that good. But, there comes a time where been there, done that, would love to do something else. And you'd go to a game. And I remember near the end, before COVID, I'm sitting at the United Center watching a Bulls team that was awful in which there were no more than 10,000 people in the building and they were bored and I was bored, but you still had to do the job. And I did the job. I don't think anybody would notice the difference. I'm still a pro, but it was like, please don't send me to all these games anymore. I'm so tired of covering the games. That was all. It was just simply that time had come like, let me try something different.
Well, another thing is, okay, sometimes when I interview people, even though we're on a screen right now, I can feel their passion and their energy. I mean, because you're not like 20, I mean, how have you maintained such positivity and passion all these years? Because even when I first interviewed you 10 years ago, I noticed that you and Dave Kerner had such a good time and you were really enjoying things.
Yeah, no, I was. I mean, listen, when I got to BBM, which is, you know, that's the format that I always wanted to be in. There's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. Listen, I'm still covering Ozzie Guillen and the White Sox and the Cubs, and I was enjoying that. It's just that after about 5 or 6 years of that, it started to becoming a job. That's funny that I say that. It wasn't a job. Doing what I did for a living really wasn't a job because I loved it. But when it started becoming a job is when I didn't love it. And so covering some of those games and, getting to the ballpark at 9 o'clock in the morning and, not getting out of there till, whatever, 5 or 6 in the evening games, you're not home till midnight. It got to be tedious. Again, professionally speaking, I did the job, but the job became a job. I think people would understand what that means is that you have a passion to do something that is, for me, was so easy to do, you know. But then if it becomes a job, it's not so easy anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of people can't even say that about what they're doing because, of course, when you meet people in the media, everybody's so excited to do it and so happy and in the zone. And then when they talk about it, like feels like a job, most people in the world are like, yeah, of course it feels like a job. I mean, I work a job. People think that way. They don't
Yeah.
have like such excitement for what they
No,
do.
no, people who do other things for a living and are at jobs for 30 or 40 years, they're doing it for money. They may have a family, what have you, and they may say, "Hey, look, this is not the greatest job in the world, but I've got to bring in income." That wasn't so much the case with me. It's just that, I would have much rather been the studio guy. Just let me do the updates. Let me write. Let me do those things. Let me be creative there. Let me do my interviews from there. That's fine. The games, look, I've covered a lot of games. I've covered a lot of incredible sporting events. I've seen a lot of history in the course of my time. When people ask me about that, that's the first thing I tell them is I got to sit in on an enormous amount of history. And I love that part. It's a good story to tell.
Yeah, and the hockey one is amazing because you just happened to be there and it was a slam dunk. I mean, I know I'm mixing metaphors, but that's what I'm saying about the Webbio situation. I mean, who would have known that would have led to such an opportunity? And Dave Ennett, which I just said, I said earlier, is such a great person for holding that spot for you.
Well, but he's that way to everybody.
Wow.
He is that guy. I mean, I've known Dave since he came back from Washington, what was it, 1982? I think. So I've known Dave for over 40 years. I mean, he's the platinum professional in our industry. He is just great. But he's that way with other people. He hired other people that were looking for work, and if he could find a spot for them, he would do that. That's who Dave is. I'm glad he's finally stepped away from the morning drive. I kept thinking to myself, Dave, when are you going to stop getting up at 3:30 in the morning to go to work? You're my age. Don't do that anymore. Finally, he stepped away, and now he's doing, Northwestern football and basketball. He probably could do that for another 5, 6, 7 years.
Mhm. Well, another thing I want to bring up is this is like a sensitive point because I worked basically behind the scenes. I mean, sometimes I was on the air, but I worked basically behind the scenes, and
Hmm.
you are cool. Okay, so I'm telling you this now on the air because I was working at GN when you went there. And
I don't
I think
recall that.
I know because because I was doing commercials and stuff, but also sometimes I'd fill in on a show. And so I do have to say to you, okay, so you were there when you came in. And I
Yeah.
remember one time you were doing sports and I was supposed to play some audio for you and I had never done any sports anything. And I was like, I think I was jumping the gun. You're like, wait, hold on. And you were so cool with me. And to tell you the truth, when on-air people are not stuck up, it sticks with me forever. Because now this is what I want to ask you, this roundabout way. Is that how come some on-air people they treat it like a hierarchy? Like they're on air and they will only associate with people on air, they'll only socialize with people on air, they'll only communicate. And then the other people are like the help. Now, you're not like that. That's why I'm bringing this up
Well,
now.
I can't get
But what
into.
makes you
uh,
different? Like, because you're not
I
like
have
that.
no idea what makes me different. I'm just who I
Okay.
am. I have no idea what's different about me and somebody else and what have you. Look, I've snapped at a few people in my
Of
lifetime,
course.
but I can't delineate the difference between me and someone else and how they react and what have you. If any time I was, punching the buttons and they didn't work, I'd get mad at myself,
Oh, yeah.
because you remember we were all that digital stuff. You did all the digital yourself. I had to
Yeah.
learn that. You had to do everything was you. So if it screwed up, it was you, and then you'd have to cover your ass, what have you. But I don't know. There are a lot of good people. I'll tell you, there are a lot more good people in the industry than there are bad people.
That's good. Well, another thing is that I noticed that you kept saying, like these people, you have all these friends and you went from one place to another. It seems like you just went from, a success to success. And why do you think that was? Because some people do not hit it, they don't progress, and you obviously have done well.
I think there's a couple of factors to that. Um, I think talent has a lot to do with
Of
that.
course.
But the other part is the way you handle yourself. So that when I started working in college, I was a pro from day one. I didn't have to say act like a pro. I just did that. It was natural for me to act that way. And so that's how I progressed so quickly in college to, experience where I was the sports director for 6 quarters instead of two. I was getting paid as the sports director. You're getting 50 bucks a week. 50 bucks a week. What's 50 bucks a week? Well, 50 bucks a week back in 1975, 1970 was pretty good money, let me tell you. So I was professional from that point on. So no matter where I went, I carried that with me. And I think that people in the industry appreciate that. I didn't have much of an ego. Maybe if I had a bigger ego, I would be doing different things. I didn't have that. Look, when I was at the score, think about the people who did have the egos. They were all big egos, from Tom Scher to Mike North, Dan Jiggets to Terry Boers and Dan McNeil, and subsequently to others. They had pretty big egos. And I didn't, but I was able to kind of blend in with that. It's like, being a pro was natural for me. And I think that that's how I succeeded. Listen, I wanted to do this when I was 8 years old. So I kind of knew when I was a kid where I was going to be going in life. There were a few side trips, like going to, the Circle, well, it was called the Circle campus, UIC. Back when I went, it was called the Circle campus. And I went there for like 9 months. I said, what am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't know why I'm here. Took a year off, went to SIU. That was it. The career began.
I do want to say, you mentioned Tom Scher and Mike North. I interviewed them both from this podcast.
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome people. Like Mike North was so encouraging to me. This is years ago. I drove up
Mhm.
to where he lived. So
No.
friendly. Oh my gosh, a wonderful guy. I'll never forget it. And Tom Sherry did like a 3 hour plus live stream and podcast with him. Totally encouraging. And
Yeah.
I never met the guy before in my life. And even today, I emailed him yesterday, but and he responds to text, gosh, what a wonderful guy. So I know they had these public egos. Now the other people I've not interviewed, but sometimes you hear about these people having egos, but maybe later on they
That's not
mess
such a
up.
bad thing, by the way. Having an ego, that's
Of
that's
course,
not
you
a
need to,
that's not a
well,
negative. There's a
yeah.
positive to having an ego. It's how far and how big your ego is one thing, but that's a, look, I know Mike North was not a type A personality. He's a type triple A personality. I've never met anyone like him. I don't think I ever will.
Yeah.
And his energy, my gosh, fueled the score. I mean, it was running on Mike North gas. I don't mean that in the other sense, but seriously, he's the guy who helped put that station on the air. He convinced Dan Lee, who owned the frequency 820, and of course, ran WXRT, to do that. And that's a great story. Mike, told that to me in the podcast. I already knew much of that. And he's proud of it, and well, he should be. That's
Mhm.
great, and he's still doing radio. He's doing his own stuff. So good for him.
Yeah, I know what you're saying because I think to have a personality on the air, you have to have an ego. and I guess what I'm saying is that in my interactions with them were not toxic in the toxic
No,
territory. They're
no.
fantastic. Yeah, thank you,
No.
those two people. And I want to interview other people. But anyway, okay, so you do have the next chapter, and what are you doing now?
And that's the story that I'm going to tell. I'm working for Midtown Athletics, which used to be called Midtown Tennis, um, which was, up until a few years ago, the largest indoor tennis facility in the country. Most people who don't know or do know, it's on the corner right up Elston, Fullerton, and Damon. And back in 2017, during the construction, I mean, they did an $85 million project to refurbish, other than the tennis courts, the entire facility, and adding a hotel. So I've been there for a little over a year and a half. How did I get there is probably the best story of my life and the best story I can tell. So here we go. It's 2002. I'm at the score. I'm doing a Saturday afternoon show, 4 hour show. It's during the NCAA tournament. And I'm talking about it. I said, well, the NCAA, I love the NCAA tournament, love the games, and I have covered 4 Final Fours. But I also said, but you know what? I never covered a US Open tennis tournament. I've never even been there. I would love to go to the US Open. And I waxed a little bit about that. Show's over, and what I usually do, Margaret, is I listen to my voicemail. So here's the voicemail, and it's this guy, very deep voice. Hello, George. This is Alan Schwartz. I'm the vice president of the United States Tennis Association. And he said, I was listening to your show and really admired the fact that you covered 4 NCAA tournaments, but have never been to the US Open. And I could tell your passion. And so I would like to invite you and a guest to be my guest in the president's box for the upcoming US Open. And I'm screaming in the phone. It's a recorded message. Who is this? I couldn't believe it. He said, just call my secretary, Juanita, on Monday. Juanita, is this true? Yes, it's true. Sent me the invitations. And several months later, I invited my friend Andy, who also I went to high school with, big tennis fan, and we went. And there was Alan, better known as Big Al. Alan Schwartz built Midtown Tennis. He built it in 1970. I didn't know Alan Schwartz. I knew him in his introduction as the vice president and soon to be the president of the USTA, but he built it. So he took us on a grand tour that Friday. Events are going on. Unbelievable human being, that what he is doing for the two of us, taking us all over the place. And then finally that evening, we are in the president's box, which is, just above the baseline, glass enclosed, sipping champagne with the president of Wimbledon, the Australian Open president. The French Open guy wasn't there. And I'm watching 2 matches. There's Serena Williams wearing a tiger outfit. Okay. She started to really get into clothing. And there was a short match. She dispatched her opponent easily. And then Pete Sampras comes on, the guy who would wind up winning that tournament. Um, or no, he won in 2001, excuse me. Anyhow, it was great. Then the next day, we have tickets to the stadium and we're watching that match. The funny thing was, Thursday was rained out, Sunday was rained out. We were there Friday, Saturday. Tremendous experience. Well, afterwards, I wanted to kind of get to know Alan Schwartz. So I, you started a relationship with him. He invited me to be a guest at the club for what was called cardio tennis. And the person that was the guest host was Tracy Austin, the Hall of Fame tennis player. It's fine. I was 54 years old. I'll remember this. He said, well, why don't you get involved? And so I was involved. I played cardio tennis. I ran around like I was a 24-year-old until I was so sore for the next 7 days. I said, I am never doing this again. No, no, thank you. But it was fun. As time went on, um, I said, Ellen, let's get together for lunch. And so we started doing that for the last 8 years of his life. twice a year, sometimes at a restaurant near the corporate office, which is on Kedzie and Addison, sometimes in the office. And eventually, when Midtown reopened in their restaurant called Chromium, we'd do it twice a year. So the last time we did it was in November. It's 2023, I think. That's something like that. He was 91 years old. He had turned 91 3 weeks prior to that. And, it's a tremendous conversation. It lasted 2 hours. And part of that, I kidded with him. I said, Alan, one day I'm going to come to work for you. And he laughed. And 3 days later, he died. And I was crushed. I was mortified. I might have been the last family member to see him. It was a Tuesday. He got ill on Wednesday and that died. And I was just, I put out a piece from the podcast and I interviewed him for my podcast. I wanted to interview, I wanted people to know who Alan Schwartz was. And then 3 months later, there was um, a special event at the synagogue in Highland Park, and people from all over the world attended. And this is who Big Al was. Well, um, anyhow, I'm finishing the book. It's 2024. I'm tooling around for a couple of months at home. And I decided to call his son, who is now the CEO, Stephen Schwartz. And I told him the whole story of my relationship with Alan. Told him the story that I'd love to come to work here. And he arranged it. And starting in June of 2024, I became a member of Midtown Athletics. I am working with their pickleball and paddleball divisions. I'm having a tremendous amount of fun. And if it was not for Alan Schwartz and a very, very chance meeting on a phone that he's listening, imagine if he's not listening to this show, this doesn't happen. He is one of the most dramatic, impactful human beings I have ever met, along with my late father-in-law. Very intelligent, worldly people who made a difference. And Alan made a difference in my life. And so I wanted to tell that story because it's fun for me to tell people that you never know who you might meet, the chance meetings that you might have with individuals, and how they can have an impact on your life. He did. I revered him. I loved him. I told Stephen, I feel like I was a member of your family. And so every day that I go to work, I always think of him. There have been times where people asked, how did you get here? I tell them the story. It's a long story, but I think it's a worthwhile story.
And what's it like working in the civilian population now?
I love it because I deal with so many people, and not just the people that I work for and with in the I'm never in the office, what's called the bunker. I just walk in, say hello, whatever. I work outdoors in the summer under a tent by the pickleball court for 5 months and indoors during the fall, winter, and early spring. I interact. My job is kind of like a liaison. I interact with a lot of people. I'm a people person, so I love it. I've met so many interesting people, um, whose names I tried desperately to remember, but it's very hard to me to remember all of these names of everybody. But I wear a name tag, so it's always hello, George. Great. Hi, Agnes. Hi, Agnes. That's the part that I enjoy the most. It took me a while to just say, this is my retirement job. I'm not retired, but this is my retirement job. And I have no end date to retire because it's joyful. I really like being there. I like the facility. I get to play tennis there when I'm not injured, but it's fun. It's a beautiful facility, and I'm proud to be a member, and for the reason why.
Well, now I know that you have to go soon, but I do have a couple comments on Facebook. Chris Space says, I've listened to George Ofman for a while now, always looked forward to his sportscasting, truly a pro's pro. And then Mike Kessler, who's
Mike Kessler.
he's been a supporter of this podcast for a long time.
Yes.
He said it's Judson Richards.
Excuse me, Judson. Thank you. I said Justin. He's good, by the way. He's a very,
Very
very
good.
talented guy. Great voice, and he knows his stuff.
And also he had a lot of Judson Richards has a lot of experience, had a lot of experience in California as well.
Yes, yeah, I know that.
Okay, well, the question I do have a final question. That you're talking about, working, you did officially retire. Well, actually, a couple questions. First is, do people know that you're the George Ofman from the media?
Very few people
Okay.
do. There are a couple, and then when some of them realized I wrote a book, um, some of them bought the book, by the way. They wanted to know why. I think it was 2 weeks ago that somebody who was on an opposing team playing paddleball came in and said, "You're George Ofman." I said, "Yes." And he was very complimentary. That doesn't happen very often. And it's okay. I mean, many of these people are not sports radio fans, and I don't know how many of them listen to WBBM. So that's kind of lessened over time, which doesn't bother me at all, but there's people do want to know because they kind of can see that I'm a little older than they are. Most of the members there, I would say, are their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. There are some people in their 60s and even older, but it's more in the 30s, 40s, 50s range. They don't know me from Adam, which is fine. They want to know, I'll let them know. Otherwise, this is my role, and I enjoy doing it.
Okay, well, my last question, because I know you have to go to work soon, is what advice do you have for people? So, for instance, it's very hard to get a job after a certain age, number one. Number two is, what advice do you have for people who want to work in sports media? Because there are a lot of guys who really, that's their dream.
Yeah, well, it's changed dramatically from when I started. I started at the right time. It was the radio sports, not sports radio, but radio sports was just blossoming to the point where when I was a freelance starting in late 1979 through for the next 20 years, but as my own business person full time for 13 years, it exploded. So I was in the right place at the right time. It's a very different game now. There's sports anchors have disappeared. Thank goodness there's still some at WBBM and at WGN. But I've said this to several people that I've run into. It's simple. It's 3 words. Follow your dreams. Follow your dreams because if you don't, you will never know what you might have missed. And I can say I followed my dreams and I'm still dreaming.
And then what about people who are older, though, who want to work? And when it's,
That I can't, it's again, that's the situation for me, which was 2010. Now we're talking 15 plus years ago, was different. I was a very lucky individual to have landed that particular job. I don't know what to tell people who are older. In this particular business, it's a really tough business. Again, I'm not so much involved in it. People now, the real blossoming part of the business is play by play. That's big for anybody who's younger. Play by play is probably one of the places you want to go. But doing sports radio, I mean, to break in on that, you've got to be incredibly lucky because in most markets, and particularly provincial markets, the people that are there, they're not going anywhere. They're staying. Take a look at the score now. Look at Matt Spiegel and Lawrence Holmes. I think they've both been there for 30 years. They haven't been on the radio all 30 years, but they've been, prevalent at that radio station. People last. Um, so I can't tell, and I don't know what to tell
no, but
people.
I mean, what about in life, though? People who are older who want a second career or something.
If you want a second career, you just got to look for it, whatever it is. You may be in a completely different role. Look, I'm still in the business of sports, albeit it's not media. Um, but my advice is if you really want to keep working, It's really up to you to find what might make you happy. That's all I can do.
And then anything else before you go to work that you want to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
Um, I don't miss it. I don't miss, being in broadcasting anymore. I still do the social media stuff. Matter of fact, I comment on Facebook and I still call it Twitter. And I commented on the Bears the other day, and here's the incredibly talented Paul Sullivan, Sully in the Tribune, quoting me about what I said on Facebook. So I'm still in the media thanks to Sully, but I did it. I did it for 50 years. I was so proud that I did what I wanted to do in life. That's lucky. Not most people aren't as lucky to find the job that they want to do or the business they want to be in and